the world awoke to news that was both shocking and, in some ways, inevitable. Under cover of darkness, American fighter jets struck Iranian military sites near Tehran and Isfahan. The Pentagon claimed these were preemptive strikes against imminent threats from Iran's drone and missile programs. Washington insisted it had irrefutable evidence of a planned attack on U.S. forces and allies. Tehran called it an unprovoked act of war. Iranian state media showed crowds in the streets, leaders vowing a crushing response. The world watched, uncertain if this was a move to prevent war or the start of one. This attack was the result of months of escalating tensions, cyber attacks, proxy battles, and now open conflict. The international community called for calm, but their voices were drowned out by the rising drumbeat of war. The question was no longer if Iran would respond, but how soon and how hard. The global economy braced for an oil shock as the Strait of Hormuz became a potential war zone. Alliances were tested, and the architecture of global security began to fracture. The world stood on the brink. Decisions made in Washington, Tehran, and other capitals in the coming hours would determine if we step back from the abyss, or plunge into a conflict that could reshape the century. The fear of a third world war was no longer abstract. It was a real, immediate anxiety in capitals from London to Beijing. The images of burning compounds and defiant crowds signaled a new, dangerous chapter. The next moves would decide the fate of millions. The world held its breath. To understand today's crisis, we must look back nearly half a century. The 1979 Islamic Revolution transformed Iran from a U.S. ally into a bitter adversary. The U.S. Embassy hostage crisis left a deep scar on American memory. For Iran's new rulers, America became the Great Satan, blamed for decades of interference. The U.S. backed Saddam Hussein in the Iran-Iraq War. Iran responded by building a network of proxies across the region. Each side's actions fueled the other's distrust and hostility. The 1988 downing of an Iranian airliner by a U.S. warship deepened the animosity. A brief hope for peace came with the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, which limited Iran's nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. But in 2018, the U.S. withdrew, reimposing harsh sanctions and shattering trust. Iran began breaching the deal's terms, escalating its nuclear activities. Attacks on oil tankers, drone strikes on Saudi facilities, and the U.S. assassination of General Soleimani brought the two nations to the brink of war. The recent U.S. airstrikes are just the latest chapter in a long, bitter saga. Decades of mistrust, proxy wars, and failed diplomacy have led to this moment. Each escalation has made compromise harder and war more likely. The roots of today's crisis run deep, entangling both nations in a cycle of confrontation. The world now faces the consequences of decades of unresolved conflict. The past is not just history, it's the fuel for today's fire. The standoff is the product of choices made over generations. Iran now faces a critical decision: how to respond to a direct attack on its soil. The pressure for retaliation is immense, but Iran's leaders are strategic, not reckless. Their likely response: a multi-pronged campaign, not a single dramatic strike. Iran's proxies in Iraq and Syria may ramp up attacks on U.S. forces, giving Tehran plausible deniability. Hezbollah could threaten Israel, risking a wider regional war. Iran could disrupt the global economy by targeting oil shipments through the Strait of Hormuz. Even the threat of closing the strait would send oil prices soaring. Economic warfare would hurt the U.S. and its allies and pressure neutral countries to push for peace. Iran might also launch a calibrated missile strike on a U.S. base, as it did after Soleimani's killing. The goal: show strength, deter further attacks, but avoid all-out war. Tehran must balance satisfying domestic calls for revenge with avoiding regime-ending escalation. Every move is calculated to inflict pain without crossing the point of no return. The world watches to see if Iran's response will ignite a wider conflict. The stakes are enormous, and the margin for error is razor-thin. Iran's next move could determine the fate of the region. The chessboard is set, and every piece matters. The U.S.-Iran conflict is now a global crisis, and all eyes turn to Russia and China. Neither wants a Middle East war that threatens their energy supplies, but both see a chance to challenge U.S. power. Russia, allied with Iran in Syria, will condemn U.S. strikes and use its UN veto to block American moves. Moscow may boost intelligence sharing and rush advanced air defenses to Tehran, raising the cost of future U.S. attacks. China, the world's top oil importer, will push for de-escalation, but also blame the U.S. for destabilizing the region. Beijing could offer Iran economic lifelines and non-lethal military tech to help it weather sanctions. The nightmare for Washington, a formal Russia-China-Iran alliance. Joint naval patrols in the Gulf, real-time intelligence sharing and advanced weaponry could tip the balance. Such support would force the US to confront not just Iran, but two global rivals. The risk a regional war morphs into a superpower showdown. Russia and China will act carefully, but their involvement could transform the conflict. The world order itself is at stake. Every move by Moscow and Beijing will be watched for signs of escalation. The US faces the prospect of a multipolar world, on the battlefield, not just in diplomacy. The stakes have never been higher. The next steps by Russia and China could decide the fate of the conflict. The crisis is no longer just about Iran. NATO, the world's most powerful alliance, faces a crisis of unity. The US acted alone in striking Iran, leaving European allies divided. Some, like France and Germany, favored diplomacy, and now see Washington's actions as reckless. The question, would NATO's Article 5, an attack on one is an attack on all, be invoked if Iran retaliates? Many Europeans would resist joining a war they believe the US provoked. A split could emerge, with the UK and Eastern Europe backing the US, while others refuse. Such division would be a gift to adversaries like Russia. Even without Article 5, the alliance faces strain. Logistical support, intelligence sharing, and basing rights are all in play. Refusing US requests could damage transatlantic ties. Agreeing could make Europe a target. A major Middle East war would also pull US focus from Europe, leaving NATO's eastern flank exposed. The alliance is on a knife's edge, torn between loyalty to the US and the desire to avoid catastrophe. The coming days will test NATO's unity as never before. The outcome could reshape the alliance for years to come. The world is watching to see if NATO holds or fractures. The specter of nuclear weapons now looms over the crisis. Iran doesn't have a bomb, but its nuclear program is at the heart of the conflict. US strikes were meant to prevent Iran from going nuclear, but may push Tehran to pursue a bomb at any cost. If Iran's regime feels threatened, it could make a desperate dash for a crude nuclear device. The US, with its vast arsenal, might consider using tactical nukes if it believes Iran is about to deploy one. The taboo against nuclear use, unbroken since 1945, could be shattered. Even a single nuclear detonation would have global consequences, breaking the non-proliferation regime and risking escalation. How would Russia and China respond to US nuclear use against a non-nuclear state? The use of one nuke makes further use more likely, opening Pandora's box. The risks are incalculable. A regional war could become an existential crisis for humanity. The nuclear threshold is the ultimate red line. The world prays it is never crossed. World wars rarely start with a global declaration, they begin with a spark. The US-Iran crisis has all the ingredients for such a spark. A direct war would quickly draw in Israel, Saudi Arabia, and their rivals. Iran's proxies would attack Israel, and Gulf states Israel would strike back, igniting a multi-front regional war. Civilian casualties and refugees would soar, overwhelming neighboring countries. Russia and China, at first providing diplomatic and economic support, could escalate to military aid if their interests are threatened. Proxy battles could turn into direct clashes, US and Russian or Chinese forces firing on each other. A single incident, an intercepted tanker, a downed jet could trigger a superpower confrontation. Once great powers are involved, escalation becomes almost unstoppable. The world could slide from regional fire to global war in days. The dominoes are lined up, one push could set them falling. The risk of miscalculation is immense. History warns us how quickly local conflicts can engulf the world. The stakes are nothing less than global peace. A US-Iran war would unleash global crises far beyond the battlefield. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz would send energy prices skyrocketing, triggering a worldwide recession. Stock markets would crash, industries would stall, and developing nations would face food shortages and unrest. International law and institutions would be paralyzed, replaced by rival blocs and a new arms race. The breakdown of order would make solving other global challenges like climate change nearly impossible. The human cost would be staggering: millions of refugees, humanitarian disasters, and environmental devastation. Burning oil fields and destroyed infrastructure would poison air and water for years. In the worst case, nuclear use could trigger a global catastrophe: crop failures, mass starvation, and a threat to human survival. The world's interconnected systems would be shaken to their core. the consequences would last for generations. This is not just a regional war, it's a threat to civilization itself. The world cannot afford to ignore the stakes. The cost of conflict would be paid by all. The world stands at a crossroads. Iran's response, limited or massive, will set the course for what comes next. Behind the scenes, frantic diplomacy is underway, with neutral nations trying to broker a de-escalation. The success of these efforts could mean the difference between war and peace. Russia and China's next moves, military support or restraint, will signal whether the conflict widens. Every statement, every troop movement, is a potential turning point. The next few days are a period of maximum danger. Leaders must decide, restraint or escalation. The world is on a precipice and every action matters. The fate of millions hangs in the balance. This crisis is the world's crisis. No one is untouched. In a connected world, a war of this scale can't be contained. Oil prices, financial markets, and global security are all at stake. We watch because this is a clash of worldviews, not just armies. The outcome will set a precedent for how future disputes are resolved by force or diplomacy. History warns us how quickly regional tensions can become global catastrophes. The echoes of 1914 and 1939 are chillingly relevant. We hope our leaders will avoid the mistakes of the past. The coming days will test diplomacy, alliances, and wisdom. The decisions made now will shape the world for generations. We are not just observers, we are all participants in this moment. The stakes could not be higher. The world holds its breath, waiting for what comes next.